Day, holiday week here in the United States. We had Memorial Day yesterday. Alex, you were sharing that you guys really kind of celebrated on Sunday. You went to the beach yesterday, was just kind of
Yep.
not much. What was the best part of the holiday weekend for you?
Oh, Tyler. Well, I hope you had a great Memorial Day weekend yourself. For me and my family, we went to the beach, and we're here down in Florida. Sunshine. It was about 91 degrees Fahrenheit. Beautiful blue skies. Jumping in the ocean. Eating a sandwich, munching on some potato chips. Like that, honestly, it was the best. It was a highlight. The kids had a great time. My son, who's almost 3, loved it. My daughter, who's 9 months, still is figuring out what sand is.
Fun. Well, we had a good time as a family, did a lot of actually work around our house. And then we had some friends over, hung out, barbecued, went to late. We had some friends that were here till 10 o'clock. So that was fun. That was
Wow.
yeah, it's past
Nice.
my bedtime. But
Wow.
today, well, we got a very interesting topic on the news wire that's going to just hit a lot of, I don't want to say hot buttons, but a lot of areas that are front and center in our world today, whether that's politics, whether that's social uprising, whether that's leadership. So I'm excited for you to queue up the article we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah. Yes, this is definitely a hot button item. So recently, CNBC had an article about for protest minded workers, employment law and free speech are not clearly on your side. And have you probably seen the news? There, Google, Amazon, a bunch of workplaces are having a whole lot of employee protests around whether it's political affairs, global economic and global, warfare that's happening, around a bunch of issues, and there's a lot of fracturing. There's a lot of very public, both in real life and on social, opinions on which side they're on, what you should support, what you shouldn't support, and it can get litigious, very litigious. I think you should really be aware of also the state of which you're employed. It really has a major
Hmm.
impact on this. And then as leadership, how do you handle all of this turmoil, challenges, fracturing within an organization? So it just leads to a lot of interesting conversation around this as an employee, as an employer, as an
Yeah.
entrepreneur. So yeah,
or
Tyler,
or
let's get
just
started.
as a member of society. I know it was about a week or so ago, maybe 2 weeks ago. My 17-year-old daughter sent me a message, and we got into a conversation. Part of her class schedule this year, I think she's U.S. history, current news, and so they watch the news every day. She's the only person in our family that I think watches the news because we won't go there. Anyways, it's part of her class, and she was talking about the protest on college campuses. And, I think when we look at this workplace protests, let's just be honest, a lot of them centralize right now upon what's going on in Israel. That tends to be a lot of and I know in regard to the article that you pointed out, part of that was in Israel based upon the reaction to some protests by employees that Google went and I think fired 28. Am I correct there? 28
Yeah.
employees.
Yep.
One of the things that I think is so interesting, this article pointed out, and I think it's something to note, is because you believe in one space or in one space, you have a legal right to freedom of speech. It does not mean in other spaces you have that, whether it's international, whether it is private compared to public.
Right.
We saw that with going back to the college protests. There's a vast difference between how it was handled on private campuses, private universities, compared to public. And the ability for certain leaders at those institutions to either stand against, control, navigate that process. And I think, as we get into it, one of the comments that I made to you pre going on air
Yeah.
was, as leaders, as people that are looking to influence and impact others, there are certain rights that we forego based upon that opportunity and that responsibility. The rights in this case, maybe I can say whatever I want to say wherever I want to say it publicly. There's times you have to forego that right. And it doesn't mean that you don't hold those opinions, or it doesn't mean at the right time you don't voice them. But what it is saying, hey, I need to measure my words and understand my actions, and I need to maximize their effectiveness and not just kind of do whatever I want to do, because those actions have consequences. And I think that was one of the biggest things that I took away is like, hey, yeah, you can do whatever you want to do. But I understand it's going to have consequences.
Yeah, Tyler, how, as a leader, let's, I guess, go with this angle first. If you are a leader in charge of people, how do you handle this without fracturing or damaging, employee relationships? You're gonna have people on both sides of the table on what they believe is right and what they believe is wrong, and have on a lot of emotion. It's very emotional. It's horrible. It's a tough situation. How, as a leader, do you handle that? Both sides without taking a side. Well, you don't support this, or you're not supporting. What's the strategy there?
So I just got back from a trip to Montreal where I had the opportunity to speak. And on my way back, I was able to finally start reading John Maxwell's latest book, High Road Leadership. It was released earlier in the month of May. And, he labels that there's three types of leadership. There's low road, middle road, and high road. And, low road takes offense. Low road is one that causes division. Low road is one that antagonizes one side to the other. The middle road's kind of like, all right, I'm just going to sit back and kind of watch. I won't make any waves. I'll just kind of go along. And high road, a high road leader embraces with curiosity to understand, why do people have the viewpoint, the thoughts, the opinions they do, and embrace that with curiosity. And I think when, what you just mentioned is in workplaces where we see the greatest difficulty is when leaders choose the middle or low road. It's when they choose the low road to say, if you have this belief, you can't be here. Instead of saying, and middle road is kind of like, well, I'm not going to get into it. You can have whatever you believe. I'm just going to, you guys wrestle it out. And the high road leader says, no, we need people with different opinions and different background and different beliefs. So that way we can become holistically better to understand either our customers, to understand those people that work here, and with curiosity, understand, why do you hold those beliefs? What experiences give you that perspective, and have that curiosity. And that curiosity is what then turns into finding a common ground. And, as John recognizes it and he writes in his book, and as I've seen, we're so polarized that, man, if you have a different opinion, well, then you're wrong.
Right.
It's like, who's to say my opinion's right? And yet that's where we find ourselves today, is a different opinion is, if it's different, it's wrong.
Yeah. I mean, that's the challenge here is, as I'm observing news media, leadership on a political level, in this country, your approach, the approach that you just mentioned, where this, is it high road leadership?
Yeah. High road,
like, it doesn't seem to be in practice at the highest levels that you would think within our system here. And that's the troubling part, that so many people are seeing. And John Maxwell, I think, is a great example and is a great leader. How do we navigate that? Why is that not the case? Especially when you would think people of such sophistication are not practicing these values.
Well, one of the things John points to, and I think it's relevant in this conversation, is usually high road leadership doesn't get clicks. High road leadership doesn't get you, on the news. There's the good news movement. There's those things, or, maybe the news has warm and fuzzy stories. But if you're looking to put your brand front and center, especially if you want to be one of those aggressive types, we haven't gotten into this because we haven't had a chance to talk about it, but I saw this over the weekend where someone is saying, you want to be viewed as intense. You want people to look at you and say, man, you're too much for me. And what's interesting about that, and we'll talk about that individual here probably on Thursday. I think that cues it up for good because it fits in there.
I love it.
Is when you choose that avenue, you're separating. Now, there's a difference between separating yourself from the pile, and that's again a reference to something John has shared. I think maybe you heard that earlier this spring. He's like, get out of the people pile. Well, the way you get out of the people pile is being a high road leader. The way you get out of the people pile is doing what people don't commonly do, which is saying, man, Alex, give me some background. Why do you have that opinion? I don't have that perspective because I've experienced different things, but that doesn't mean that I don't value what you've experienced, because that can give me a perspective that I don't have. John, points this out, and I want to go back to the George Floyd incident, right? George Floyd death, and in Minneapolis, the police force there. And one thing that at that point, I'm white. All right, I may look dark, but I'm white. And I grew up on a farm in the Midwest, and racially pretty homogenous. And in this process, and at that time, and I looked at, like, what am I missing? What am I missing about that incident? What am I missing about the upheaval that was occurring at that time? So I reached out to two good friends, both in this case Black. Said, guys, give me some perspective. Help me understand. Like, because I don't see it, I don't understand it. It doesn't mean that I can't see facets of it, but I haven't gone through what you've gone through. And ironically, both of them were raised in the Midwest like I was. One was raised in Ohio, one was raised in Iowa, and yet completely different growing up. Like, how they were raised, their experiences completely different. And one of the biggest things that I took away from them is that, Tyler, thank you for being curious.
Yeah.
Like, we could sit down and, sometimes people have some experiences, some people have others, whether it's the, an ism, a sexism, a racism, whatever it may be, but with curiosity saying, hey, what am I missing?
Right.
Because when we say, what am I missing? Then all of a sudden we turn the lens away from, well, my world is perfect. Your world must be wrong, as in saying that my world is, broken or incomplete. So I need to see someone else's perspective. All right, let me bring this back to the protests. And oftentimes when we fall into those situations, and I think as leaders, the callous remark is, if you stand against us, you're out. And so instead of saying, hey, you stand against us, you're out, saying, okay, why are they standing against us? What are we missing? Why are they choosing our environment to protest? There's two things there. Do they feel safe enough that they can voice their opinions here? That's a good thing. Or are we doing something to be a part of the problem that we don't realize that they feel they need to stand against in connection with the organization? And I think that's something as leaders, you got to ask more and not jump to conclusions.
Yeah, no, it's an extremely challenging situation, and for me, any time there's killing and death, it's not good, right? No matter where you look at it.
I would say that's pretty universal,
right.
Alex. I mean,
you would think, Todd.
Well,
think.
yes, I agree.
That's not always the case.
No, you're right there.
And so I would have to imagine too, especially if you're a leader at a larger, more public facing organization, that there is a lot of bureaucracy and red tape and almost pressure, maybe from external forces and internal forces, to take a side.
Wow. I would say there's probably as many forces, going back to that, the analogy of low road, middle road, high road. I would say there's a lot of forces to go the middle road, because that's the safe road. And the middle road isn't the safe road. I shared this a couple weeks ago in one of my newsletters, talking about a, situation leadership that I've seen happen in my world the last couple months. And the road was kind of like, I'm going to non-engage. I mean, there was an employment situation, and instead of actually coming out with a statement, they just stepped away and they said nothing. Like they were gone. There was no interaction. And one of the things that I understand there is legally, their legal counsel said, don't say a word. Now, that may keep you safe in the court of law, right? If as leaders, you don't say anything, you are non-committal, you actually go dark. Right. It's pretty hard to indict you on words that you don't say in a court of law. The difference is in the court of public opinion, you're going to be found guilty time after time after time after time. And I think that is, where in leadership we get into a difficult circumstances that, instead of just saying, okay, well, these people did what we did, I'm going to go to the 28 people that got fired. I don't know the exact circumstances. I'm just speculating for conversation's sake here. And in context to hold that together, right, is instead of saying, all right, let's ask more. Why are they protesting? What is this about? Let us deeper understand. Why do we as an organization feel like we need to let these people go? And let's voice that as opposed to let's cut it off so that way we can get away from it and it doesn't fall back on us anymore. See, the legal thing to do is to get us far away from it so you're not held accountable. The public thing to do, the high road thing to do is probably, if you choose to do that, that's fine, but also engage and say, hey, let's have a conversation. Let's understand why, we may have to take an action that may seem a little contrary. And again, that's going to probably make you liable to certain extents in the court of law. But when you talk about the court of public opinion, when you talk about the bigger picture and the long-term picture, man, it's so much healthier because now you look at it, okay, let's just play this out. Right. I don't know what they said. I don't know if there's a statement, but just say Google did not make any statement. They just fired the people. Let's get away from it. They're the topic of our discussion. Yeah. They are world public facing right now. Now, what happened if they came out and they said, we understand your right as a citizen, if that's the case in the organization, to protest, to voice your opinions, to have these things? That's fine. Man, we applaud that. But as a Google employee, you know what? There are certain things that we hold as a company to be very near and dear. And part of that is embracing different opinions because we're in so many different countries. And what is okay in one country isn't another. And we hold a global standard, whatever that may be. These are the missions. These are the values. And if are your actions aligning with the values? And if they're not, hey, that's the problem.
Well, I think there's a good moment to shift into the mindset of maybe the employee. If you're the person who's feeling enraged, upset over certain situations or responsiveness from your business or your company that you work for, do you go out and get vocal, both in real life like these protesters did, and write and say something on social media? And should you take that action because you just feel that it's the right thing to do, and the repercussions that could come with it, like losing your job? What kind of, can you take the same approach, I guess? Or is it similar?
Oh, the interesting concept is, I think yesterday in the United States, Bill Walton passed away. Bill Walton was an NBA Hall of Famer. He was a two-time national champion in college at UCLA. He was an NBA champion. And Danny Ainge was one of his teammates. He's an executive in the NBA now, was sharing a story about Bill playing for the Boston Celtics one year. And he comes to camp. He comes to camp early, and he's just a character. If you ever watched any of his, games that he called, or when he was guest on certain sports shows, he's just a character. And one of the things that Danny Ainge shared is it was a couple of days before the season. There's like 3-4 days before the season, and Bill comes to the team and said, "Hey guys, I'm going to miss the next 3 or 4 days." And they're like, "What do you mean?" He goes, "I got to go away." And they're like, "Dude, we start our season in a couple days. Like, what are you talking about?" And he goes, "Well, I need to go do a sit-in in the Dakotas on a reservation." He goes, "What?" He's like, "Yeah." Because he believed so much in certain rights that he was willing to forego what that meant to that profession, knowing that there's going to be cost there. But this is what I take away in this context. He did so not out of disparaging the organization or his teammates. He didn't just leave and they're like, dude, where are you?
Right.
He sat down and said, hey, this is where I'm going. I'm letting you know where I'm going because this is something I believe in. And I think when it's approached that way, there is no doubt in my mind. You've played, collegiate level sports. I've played sports at some point in time in my life. There is no doubt in my mind his teammates were like, oh, this dude's a whack job. But two, man, if he's willing to do that, there's nothing he's willing to do anything for us, right?
Yeah.
And I think because they understood that charisma and that care that he had with them individually, that his words meant so much because he said, I'm willing to go do this at the cost of me professionally. But you know what? It's because I believe in certain rights and I'm willing to do that. And I think when we come back to this conversation as employees, is that the way you're going about it? Or are you going about it in ire or disgust and almost a penchant against? There are times where we do need to stand up. I have stood up. I've stood up and I've been very vocal where there have been situations what I didn't agree in.
Right.
But I also knew that came at a cost. I also knew that came at a weight, and I had measured that. And I think that's the story about Bill. Bill had measured that at that point in his life, realizing if the team decides to cut me over this, that, you know what? I can accept that because that was a potential that could have happened, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, for those listening, I think this is a great lesson. If you're feeling a certain way, the approach you take and how you handle it and the steps you take need to be really methodical. Like there has to be a thought process to how you're going to approach a situation that you're taking a certain stance on. And Tyler, I think you're saying you're not saying don't take, because you're going to get in trouble, you get fired. It is, if you have that strong belief, you believe in it, wholly. There is a proper way of approaching it and handling it and weighing out the options and the possible repercussions from it. But if handled the right way, it could actually kind of work out. Like it could be okay. And in some situations, you go, these are the consequences. I'm going to approach it the right way, and it is what it is, and you do what you have to do.
I think that is coming to a point in life of understanding consequences for our actions. Yeah. All of our actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are actually benefits. And sometimes those consequences are painful and difficult. And I think the challenge here is when we don't respect the consequences to our actions. Again, that scale varies tremendously. That scale really escalates the more responsibility, impact, influence that you have. It goes higher and higher and higher. And, that scale really starts to tip and your actions are more dynamic and meaningful. I remember, I'm going to use a dairy nutrition example. You ready for this? I'm going to dip back into the
background, by the way, is one of the best things about you. So we need to bring it up more.
So one of the things that was very interesting being a nutritionist for dairy cows, and this is what I learned. And this is why I said, there's a big difference in going 60 miles an hour and the problems that happen on the road as compared to going 200 miles an hour. When you're driving an IndyCar, we just had IndyCar, we just had F1 over the weekend, right? If you're driving a car and you're going 60 miles an hour and you make a little to the steering wheel, not that big a deal. It doesn't throw you totally off course. You just correct, you can handle it. You do that 220 miles an hour and you're into a wall, you're going over it, and you probably might not survive. See, we would share that in dairy nutrition. It's like when your production level is a pretty moderate, there's not a lot of stress, you can get away with not handling everything perfect environmentally. You ratchet up that performance, you ratchet up that stress level, you ratchet up that responsibility, And all of a sudden, a little blip can cause a major consequence. And I think that's the same here in regard to the standard you're held to in leadership. Yes, you are given the absolute right to voice whichever you have, whatever you have.
Right.
But the responsibility and the impact goes much higher in the potential risk, or the potential consequence, the potential benefit, if done right, is much higher. And you have to, it's a requirement that you respect that.
Is that a requirement of a great leader?
I would say this: it's a requirement of every leader. Great leaders handle it with exceptional skill and ability. Mm. Every leader, every person that is a parent, in my opinion, is a leader. A parent has the ability to influence and impact another life directly by being a parent. That, your actions as a parent, there's consequences to it, right? You think back before you and Ashley had kids, and what was the potential consequence of your actions? And now all of a sudden, you have two people that rely on every facet of life on you.
Yeah.
Man, your consequences look a whole lot different. And that's the same in any role of leadership, is that when people are either relying on you or you have impact on them, your actions are way more impactful. And that's a measurement. And the great leaders handle that so well. They handle it so well and do so deftly. That's the difference between a low road leader who doesn't care about others compared to a high road leader who, in the words of Roger Staubach, high road leaders go the extra mile. And this is what he said about going the extra mile. There's not much traffic. There isn't. Yeah. And you think about that, that's the separation you want. Is, what, you guys have think about one of the executives at this organization and say employees handled it properly, right?
Right.
Say they, even however they handled their protests or their opinions or their beliefs, and say they handled it in a way that was conducive to the environment, the values of their organization. And as a leader, I said, man, I may not agree with this personally, but I support your cause and I am behind you, even though I don't agree, because you've handled in such a way that is with dignity, that is with respect to others. I'm going to embrace what you're doing. Man, that's a different level. That's a extent of a presidential level along the lines of Abraham Lincoln, who stacked his cabinet with people that were his opponents and detractors. Why? Because he knew that was the only way to bind a country during a very difficult time.
I always find, I was just reading this, and I see it all the time, where you see, Gen Zers, millennials, the younger demographic, let's say 18 to 40, always are, in every article, they're more likely to speak out. They're more likely to voice their opinion. And then you got, when you get to like 45, 55, 65, 70, it's always, they're less likely to talk out of line and out of line and formalize what their opinions are publicly. I don't know if that's 100% true, but you always read it. It's in the article right here. Especially for younger millennials and Gen Z workers who are more inclined to speak out and more opinionated. Maybe is that because they're just younger and naive, or because if you go back to the 60s when people in their 70s, were growing up, they were pretty vocal too.
There were wild protests. I was just thinking, we've had these college, go back to, I mentioned the college protests. I grew up in Ohio. I grew up not far from Kent State University. In 1970, 4 students were killed during a protest. It was the name of a song, 4 Dead in Ohio by Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Right? And we think back, and it's so, myopic to say, oh, what I'm going through is the worst ever. What I'm going through, it's never been compared. Like, it's pretty hard. I'm only 44. I only know so much, and I've only read so much. And I look back and say, there are some times that, I talked to my dad about this. Like, in the 60s, as a guy who graduated high school in 68 and was going through some of these things, it's like, you had presidents assassinated. A couple years later, you had students killed. It's like a little different circumstance. And so when we think about that, is voicing opinion is very much a product of an age. How you do it is the product of the culture and the environment at the time. And I think that's where it's very interesting in how you handle that. I think we could sit and say that there's been in the times of past, which could have been yesterday and beyond, where we didn't handle uprising and protests right. And I look at that to say, all right, how are we going to handle the next one better? How are we going to brace? And I think that comes back to the product of leadership to say, am I curious about why? I was actually listening to a book yesterday. One of the things I did yesterday was I mowed. It's kind of a one I have to do.
And you have around 5, 6, 7 acres, maybe more.
We have 10 acres, and we have roughly about an acre's worth of grass. We have a half acre that is what I would term fairway quality grass. My brother actually installed it, who is turf grass background. So it, as somebody had said, is probably the nicest turf field in the entire area.
Oh, man.
Put in a lot of work. It looks nice. Anyway, so I'm doing that, and I'm listening to a new book. It's by Kendra Hall. And Kendra Hall is an author who talks a lot about storytelling. And her latest book, I'm just pulling up the title here, The Story Edge. And she talks about how there's always more to the story and how impactful stories are for leaders. We actually have an amazing speaker at the Impact Summit this summer, Katie Casada, who's going to guide us through storytelling as leaders, because one, fashioning the story helps improve its ability to impact. But there, as well as from this story from Kendra, stories are magical. And, as she was talking about it, and I've alluded to it a lot today, is there's more to the story. Yeah. There's more to the story. And I think as leaders, are we looking into that and understanding, ooh, there's more here? Am I trying to be curious to ask? Am I willing to be empathetic in other people's stories, to walk along with them and understand their story is different than my story, but it does not disqualify their story? And I think that's where we look at this from a protest point of view and organizationally, is there are times where, yes, man, you're held to a higher standard when you're representing someone else other than yourself. And that standard can sometimes be oppressive. But I understand that's part of the responsibility. That's understanding the consequences to your actions. So you can say, I don't want to withhold my opinions. It's like, well, then don't represent that organization or that cause. See, those are the choices. And yet we have freedom of choice in a lot of ways. And that choice extends to where we spend our time. Like, we have that opportunity because there's always more to the story.
Yeah. And no, Tyler, I love getting on and talking with you about all these different subject matters, and I just always learn so much. And it's a really good time to plug the event. If you're enjoying this conversation and interested in all the leaders we mentioned, John Maxwell is going to be there, Katie Casada, Graham Cochran, Jake Thompson. Please register. You can just go to tylerdickerhoof.com, and register now. July 29th and 30th in Idaho, Coeur d'Alene. I think, it's going to be a beautiful event where we're going to learn everything you're saying here, all this knowledge, all this information, this balance of how to approach really challenging situations that we face as leaders, as people, and especially leadership positions. And how do we bring people together? How do we walk alongside them and understand how they're feeling, what they're going through? And I think it's going to be a beautiful event. I'm looking forward to it a little later on this summer.
As you were sharing there, and I'm thinking about, John sharing about hybrid leadership and how timely it is. And John has a few books that are just so magically timed. I'm a person of faith, and, I align that and look at that. But I also think about this. We talk about high road leadership, and he's going to talk about it and what the difference is. And, my wife and I, we lead a fairly large organization in network marketing company. And there's a lot of people with totally different beliefs, totally different backgrounds from all over the country. And one of the things that I've understood, and again, as you're sharing with it, and this was brought up to me this weekend when I was in Montreal, a man who listened to a lot of my content approached me and said, Tyler, I've had a background. I had a faith and belief, and I stepped away and I pursued another kind of belief system. And I realized real soon that, man, there was some real dark side to it. And he goes, and so I'm stepping away from that. And I appreciate you living the way you live because it shows me what I'm missing. And I'm like, thank you. I appreciate that. And one of the things that I understand as a leader is so often it's not our job to proselytize or inject or judge or, try to force people. But how we live and living by this, going the extra mile, the Roger Staubach way, the way that we carry ourselves and handle our beliefs, if we're consistent, and that's the key, consistent, man, it's tremendously impactful. Now, I'm saying that because that's what was told to me 2 days ago, 3 days ago, and it caught me by surprise, and it wasn't overwhelming because I've had that before. But yet it was very gratifying that, whether people are enjoying this content or not, that, there's someone out there that is going to hit at the right time. And I think when we start stepping into that position of leadership and putting ourselves out there and what do we stand for, there's a way to stand for things and divide, or there's a way for stand for things and bring people together. And I think that's the great opportunity, the great lesson to learn. If you're standing for something and bringing people together and you're looking for that as the pathway, man, it's impactful. But if you're standing for something to divide or cause a breakdown, it's usually going to end up with a consequence that is unanticipatedly negative. Not absolutely, that isn't universal, but man, I think that tends to happen.
No, I agree. And, Tyler, I just wanted to, tease. We're going to be going live, Mondays and Thursdays. Today's a Tuesday live. We're going to be going live again on Thursday. I hope people tune. Please smash the like, hit the subscribe button. It does help get this message, get these videos out to more and more people, and just raise awareness about the impact that you're making on people's lives. And I just always appreciate jumping on these with you each week. It's been great.
Yeah. Well, again, thanks to everyone for watching, listening, partaking. Thanks for your time, Alex, to bring this information and bring to the discussion. Can't wait to be with you again on Thursday. We're going to come up with something great. Thursday's going to be pretty good. I already know Thursday's. Let's tease it.
What's going on Thursday? What are we going to talk about?
I think we're going to talk about this whole arena of self-improvement. This whole arena of, are we going back to what I very started? Are we aiming for clicks? Or we actually want people to walk away with something that is beneficial and impactful? Are we looking to be that one that people are like, oh, he's too much? Or are we looking at that person that's like, wow, I can't believe what they helped me accomplish.
Right. You're talking about this personal development coaching space, eh?
Yeah. It's an interesting little world. Be afraid what you be cognizant of the potential outcome, because it may not be what you're really wanting. So
I'm excited for it.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
It'll be a fun conversation.
Beautiful.
Thanks for being here. Catch you next time.